Good afternoon, everybody from Hume City Council. Thank you so much for coming along today. If you're watching the recording of this, you're very, very welcome as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be talking about burnout today, which is very topical, I think. And if you want to watch this recording with a family member later on, a significant other, etc., please, by all means, feel free to log on to the to your intranet and download it. And as always, you do have access to your EAP service if things are challenging in any way, shape, or form. So I just wanted to raise those points. So as I said, today we're talking about burnout. I'm going to come down out of your way a little bit. And actually, just before we started recording, we were having a quick conversation around what's kind of happening for people, particularly in this idea of finding balance in our lives. And I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not going to say a show of hands, but it's an interesting. You can ask the question of yourselves if you like, and the question really is: if you're working from home, at least some of the time, which I think a lot of people are, do you find it hard to switch off? There's a concept called FOLO. Now, we know FOMO is fear of missing out. FOLO is fear of logging off. It's a real thing, and we might have touched on it recently in a previous session. I would have mentioned it, but so this fear of logging off. What happens is we kind of tend to not be able to bookend our day between when we begin and when we finish, if you like, and that could be a challenge for some people. And there's a number of different reasons. I feel like if I keep going, I'll get on top of things, and then the joy in our lives disappears. The first thing to go when we're burning out, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We have before. We will again. It's a point I push. But there's also, there can be other things in our lives that can create burnout, and it's not always just work related. And this inability to switch off sometimes can sort of cause us trouble. So in a sense, I'm just wondering who amongst us finds that they're more than just tired or exhausted. Even our ability to do our best work can start to disappear, particularly if we're not switching off and if we're not having a balance in our lives, if it's all work and no play. And what occurs there, of course, is it's even harder then to find the ability to stop. So this fear of logging off occurs because we're just afraid we'll miss something, etc. And I'm here to tell you, every light bulb will blow. Every hard drive will fail, and every one of us has a breaking point. So we're not just talking about, being incapable of doing the work. That's actually not what it's about at all. It's a much bigger conversation than that, because burnout can occur in a number of different places. Let's have a look at this for a second. This is a model that I've derived from the traditional view of burnout. And burnout was, as a concept, was created or defined by Chrissy Maslach and Michael, I think it's Leiter, Canadian people, researchers and experts in this space. And they came up with the concept of burnout when they were exploring what happens in the health sector. People were, we're developing issues around having a sort of compassion fatigue, and something was happening when people were they were more than tired and more than exhausted. And so in exploring that, what the Maslach Burnout Inventory, MBI, which is still the industry standard, which is still the global standard for measuring burnout in individuals and organizations. And they have these three areas. There's exhaustion, which we all understand, but exhaustion can be broken down into three different areas: mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, and emotional exhaustion. So it's not just feeling tired, it's way more than that. And to meet the criteria for burnout that Chrissy Maslach created, she said, and the World Health Organization has said, you need to meet these three sort of areas for it to be officially classified as burnout. I have an issue with that. But let's cover some of the other two areas. So exhaustion we get. When they say efficacy, what they're really talking about is our ability to do our best work. So even though we could be the most passionate people for our role, but just we start to forget stuff. Like for me, I had a habit of forgetting the names of people I work with on a daily basis. And it still occurs from time to time when I'm becoming a bit burned out. It's a signal for me, a trigger. Other people I've spoken to forget how to spell. One guy the other day was trying to write the word picnic, and he was P-I-C-K-N-I-C-K, and he's staring at it, knowing it's wrong, but couldn't figure it out. We forget the ability to sort of do simple arithmetic, short-term memory gets affected, etc. So that efficacy or ability and effectiveness to do our job can slip. The other one I want to talk about on a deeper level is this idea of cynicism. And whether you're a team leader or a team member, if you start to experience somebody being a bit cynical in the team, it'll look like gossip. It'll look like somebody speaking unfavorably or disparagingly about the leader or the organization or the workload, or worse, it could be around the clients that you work with. And it gets very slippery when it gets to that. So this idea of cynicism is that just kind of jaded, and that mental distance from the role will start as gossip. And it's usually the first sign. What's happening here with that sort of gossip is it's a very lonely place to be. So very often when we're in that space, we try and recruit others in there with us so that we're not alone. But also to validate our feelings, if you like, to sort of say, we're not wrong for thinking and feeling like this. If I'm not the only one, then it must be right. And the problem with that cynicism thing is it'll actually spread like wildfire. So it's harmful, and we need to jump on it and check in with people if we're hearing it or experiencing it, particularly if we're leaders. What's really happening for somebody when they become cynical is they no longer feel like they're seen. They no longer feel like they matter, or that they belong, if you like, in some way, shape or form, or that what they're contributing is valuable anymore. So we start to lose their sort of sense value. They're not feeling heard and they're not feeling seen. So we need to sort of support people in that space. So that's the traditional World Health Organization and sort of research view on exhaustion. Just looking at that for a minute, can you see anything that's missing? Because it's been glaring at me for some time as though there's something going on here that's not right, that there's something missing from it. And given the time we've got, we won't go into chat rooms or anything, but I'm going to suggest to you that this is what it is. This is my model on burnout. And I think I drill a little bit deeper. And since doing so, I've found that Professor Gordon Parker, University of New South Wales, has written a fabulous book on burnout, which is, easy to find. And it's well worth a read if this interests you. He found 12 different things, but I think that's too many for us to sort of control. So in my mind, yes, exhaustion is very much a part of burnout. I think efficacy is not a word that people sort of understand or follow very much. It's not one that you hear very often. But this idea of our ability to do our best work, whether it's work-related, our ability to care for elderly parents, if that's where our burnout is coming from, etc. And the ability to do our best stuff diminishes even when we have the best of intentions. I have changed cynicism to apathy. Because in my mind, cynicism is an external sort of process, if you like. It's kind of putting the blame outwards on everything that's going on. And to my mind, when we're burning out and we're in that sort of cynical space, it speaks much more to apathy. We can no longer, we just lose that sort of sense of caring. And so, we might become cynical and gossipy, but we might actually just internalize it ourselves. But it's a dangerous place to be, because it's when we lose our self-worth and self-value. So then the part that was missing is what we call affect. And an affect disorder very broadly speaking in psychology terms, an affect disorder is our emotional response to external sort of stimuli, if you like. So I'm talking things like anxiety, and I'm talking about things like depression. They're called affect disorders. And that was missing always from the other burnout definitions. It just sort of spoke to this idea. For some reason, it just didn't exist in there. Sorry, Donna, I'm only seeing your note now, and I'm not sure what you mean by motivation. But I'm thinking it's around ability. I'm thinking that's where you were going with that. And absolutely, yes, that sort of drive that we've got will go. Particularly if we're not feeling seen or heard or sort of accepted for where we're at. And so when we're in that space for a chronic period of time, we will develop an affect disorder. We will develop anxiety or depression or some other sort of mental health challenge. So that's my definition of what burnout looks like. It's a little bit more than the traditional one because mental health was missing from the equation. Not all burnout is work-related, by the way. And when it is work-related, it's going to be around things like a high-pressure workplace. Of course, everybody's got one of them now. It can happen when we've little control over our work, when we don't feel autonomous in what we're doing, and so the work becomes monotonous. We're chicken pluckers. If you're a chicken plucker, you're not looking at how motivated the chickens are. You're kind of watching the clock to see what time you can log off. So that's work-related stuff that, you know, when it's work-related burnout, we're looking at the penguin and we're missing this great big iceberg of stuff that we can do that will affect it. But other areas of burnout can be things like lifestyle. If we've got no balance in our lives, if we do have this FOLO, we can't switch off. You know, we take on too much in other areas of our lives. We can't say no. You know, we spoke about boundaries and how to say no in the last session, and we'll cover it again later because it's important. But, you know, things like poor sleep, stuff like that, that's going on for us will relate to burnout. There's no doubt at all about that. Or personality, perfectionism is another one. Anxiety is huge if we can't switch off. What I call control freakism. I don't know if it's a word, but I think, you know, it's fairly clear what I mean by that. So burnout isn't just work related. It can be in other areas of our lives, taking care of, you know, when we were in lockdown, looking after kids, looking after special needs kids, special needs elderly parents, etc. All of that stuff in our lives can actually cause us to burn out. But ultimately, burnout is a sort of a reaction to chronic load of stress that we can't sort of deal with. And there is a difference between stress and burnout, because with stress is usually short term. There's a sort of a sense of urgency and hyperactivity around it. We can lose or maybe diminish some sort of elements. Taking care of ourselves is exactly right, but we can lose some of our sort of energy when we're dealing with stress, and it can lead to burnout. But it's usually that over engagement, wound up like a 2-bob watch kind of thing. Whereas burnout actually is the other. It's a flattening. It's a bit like anxiety versus depression. One is hyper energy, the other one is much lower. And burnout will have that sort of blunted or distant emotions, and that sort of, our motivation again is completely gone. I think Donna was talking about emotion. There you go. That'll talk about it. And burnout is emotionally tolling because it seems endless. But I just want to very quickly, I'm going to do this in about 30 seconds or less. Ultimately, what I'm about to say isn't true. Sorry. But it's a very useful way of explaining what's going on. There aren't 3 parts to the brain like I'm pointing out here. Where's my pointer gone? There aren't 3 parts to the brain like I'm pointing out here, but there are processes within our brain that are predominantly reptilian, mammalian, and then sort of higher executive thinking. And what's happening for us when we're experiencing burnout or higher chronic levels of stress, our fight or flight response is switched on all the time. Our brain cannot tell the difference between danger and stress, so it responds in the only way it knows how, and that is our fight or flight response. And so we're in that sort of, we're not getting our energy from digestion anymore. We're getting it from our adrenal glands and adrenaline and cortisol and all of these things, that chemicals that runs course through our body. And if we don't deal with them, can be incredibly harmful, which is why we talk about having balance in our lives. We need to find ways of switching all of that off. And it is things like diet, sleep, exercise, play, meditation, all of the sort of buzzwords we hear all the time, but that's how we switch off this fight or flight response. So I think it's important that we recognize and have a think about actually how you would recognize burnout in other people. Don't worry about yourselves. We eventually get there. But I'll tell you this, burnout is a creeper. It sneaks up on us. We're much more likely to see it in somebody else than we'll see it in ourselves. I'll say that again. We are much more likely to see burnout in other people before we'll see it in ourselves. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Main ones are we're very unforgiving. Our self-critic is very, very harsh, and we tell ourselves we should be able to deal with the stress levels we're under, or we should be able to sort of manage the kids, or whatever it is that's causing our burnout. That's predominantly it. Our self-critic won't allow us, and we make excuses for ourselves. But it's very, very interesting that we can see it in somebody else. And so let's have a quick chat about what we're going to see, but first of all, where we're going to see it. Let me get out of your way. So there's a sort of a continuum, if you like. There's a sort of a sliding scale between engaged and burnout. And as we say, the first one we're likely to experience is that exhaustion. These slides will all be available as well, folks, anyway, if you need them. But if you want to take a screen grab of that, by all means, take a screen grab of any of these that you see that you think are interesting. So we're engaged in our role. We're doing really well. We become overextended for various reasons, not always workload, but very often workload or maybe clarity around our role or whatever's happening. Our sleep is shitty, whatever it is that we're losing it. So we're exhausted. When that happens, we start to become disengaged a little bit. And then this is where that cynicism or apathy sort of thing slips in. And our attitude sort of shifts because we're not feeling like we're not getting the love. We're not feeling it. And so we become ineffective, and our ability to do our work, best work, will slip even when we're passionate. So that sort of morale starts to slip, etc. And the quality of our work starts to slip. We're not good enough. We're not competent enough. And then we give ourselves a hard time. And then we're at the lonely place of burnout. So it's not on or off. Burnout doesn't just happen and switch off. And I always have this idea that if somebody says to me, I'm burnt out, I don't check in to see whether they're cynical and whether their ability to do their work has shifted. If someone says to me they're burnt out, they're telling me that they need help. And that usually is enough for me to say, okay, we need to act on that. But we can then start to look where on this sort of spectrum they are. So we don't need to diagnose people or anything like that, but we just we'll get a bit of an idea of where they are from terms of engaged or extended or ineffective, etc. So that's where that'll come from. Very quickly, watching the time. I was just asking a while ago, how would you recognize burnout in other people? This is an old acronym, PAGER, which is a throwback to the times when we had those pages, all these things that clip on your belt and give you a message that attention is needed. This is where they would think. Karen, let's come to that at the end of the session. I'd love to answer that question. I'd love to actually throw it out to other people as well. Spoiler alert, yeah, I absolutely do. Right. I absolutely do think there's a stigma around your burnout. But this pager idea it might be a useful way for us to be able to spot whether we think we can see this in other people. Performance, if it's impaired, it's lower than usual. This is the sort of efficacy or ability we're talking about. That's going to be diminished. People's appearance can change. We can start to lose the sort of, personal hygiene. We start to lose our sense of fun. We start to isolate a little bit, so you can see poor posture in people that have just had it, right? They're not going to be bright and bubbly. growth, when I say growth, I mean that sort of loss of purpose, that sort of loss of what you'd like to do, where we're going with our lives, so I share it with everybody else. If I've got that loss of hope, big warning sign. Emotional outbursts, anger is probably the one that will appear here first of all. And so that sort of irritation, irritability with other people, snapping at them. We'll be talking about civility much later on in this program. It's come around again, the good old-fashioned manners, but it's become a challenge when people aren't experiencing what we're experiencing. And then finally, isolation, as I say, relationships with other people. Stop having lunch, don't catch up for coffee, don't go out on a Friday night anymore, or whatever it is that, that would have been normal behavior starts to slip. And the other reason, as I said earlier on, burnout is contagious, absolutely. Actually, that's probably slightly misleading. That cynicism and apathy I was talking about, that's contagious because we try to recruit other people into that space with us because we want to validate our feelings, and it's a shitty, lonely place to be on our own. So, of course, we're going to check in, are other people feeling the same way as me? And then that's when that sort of gossip all starts. Cynical apathy spreads. So if you're hearing that gossip, tackle it and jump in on it if you get a chance. So then, it affects everybody, burnout. Burnout is everybody's business. It affects the entire organization and particularly individuals. You can see here, take a screen grab of that if you want, and you can explore it a little bit more in your own time. I won't delve too long into it here. But basically, the effects of exhaustion and cynicism and efficacy as experienced within the organization, and leaders will see it. It affects performance. It affects results, ruptures teams. People become sort of less than who they usually are. For the business, you've got the reputation and client relationships can be affected. Obviously, capacity, performance, profitability, absenteeism, all of these sort of measures of the organization can be deeply, deeply affected by people experiencing burnout who aren't getting the sort of level of help and support they need. I get asked a lot, what do I do in a minute? Do I have to leave the organization? No, you don't. Think of this. Gordon Parker shared this in his book. He shares this analogy. He said, think about a candle. And a candle that's flickering, in a draft or something like that. How you deal with that is very different to how you deal with a candle that's blown out. And so kind of think of it like that. If somebody came to me and said, I'm burnt out, I've had it, I can't do it anymore. Are you a flickering candle or are you blown out? Because either way, so the recovery can be quick if we change the circumstances in which people find themselves. I've worked with teachers in schools. Now you can imagine there isn't a whole lot you can do to change what a teacher does if they're feeling burnt out. But I have found that even giving somebody a passion project, something that they can lock onto and find that sense of purpose and sense of belonging again, can be very, very effective. Even if it feels like more work, it's kind of better work, if you like, because it's related to autonomy and engagement, and it's related to the things that combat burnout, if you like. Doing something that has some impact, that's the important part. And yes, let me just get out of the way here again. So yes, restoring good physical and mental health. This is what this sort of program is all about, if you like. Upskilling ourselves in radical self-care, not just sleep, diet, exercise, not the usual suspects. More than that, mindset, emotional intelligence, empathy, all of the things that we need that'll support our self-care in a better way. We'll reignite our clarity and our inspiration and our resilience, etc. But it's important also, if somebody is burning out, if it's work-related burnout, it's an organizational problem, not a person problem. We need to look at workload. We need to look at balance in their lives. We need to look at whether somebody has clarity around what's expected of them, what's expected of them in the role. Are they getting good constructive feedback so that they know what's required. And if they do, then that inspires that sort of engagement and motivation that we need to renew people back into that sort of out of burnout, if you like, for want of a better way of putting it. We can renew people's motivation and skill sets and ability to deal with it. But it'll always come back to this, I think. Bessel van der Kolk is an expert in mental health, particularly around areas of trauma. And his line is, being able to feel safe with other people is the single most important aspect of mental health. And being able to feel safe with other people includes psychological safety in the workplace. Knowing that we belong, knowing that we matter, we're contributing to something that's bigger than us is really, really, really important and really valuable. Just like from a survival instinct alone, that is one of the biggest things that we can ensure that we create for people around us. And if you're a leader, you don't have to rescue or save anyone in this space. Just create the space for them to feel like they belong. That's a really, really good start. So I'm just mindful of time, and I want to leave a few minutes for Karen's question, which I think is fantastic, by the way. Karen, thank you. I'm going to share something that I'm going to invite you to take a screen grab of, because I'd love you to ask yourself these questions. And then maybe ask somebody near and dear to you. It could be a work colleague, it could be a partner. If they answered the questions on your behalf, would they be similar answers, or would they be very, very different? And there are things in here that will be kind of obvious and stuff that won't be obvious, but they all lead to, or they all would suggest that maybe we need to take some better self-care, particularly around our own sort of burnout levels, etc. So I'm going to come back in on 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I hope you got your screen grab on that. And so when you do answer those questions, you'll find somewhere where you can incorporate them into your action plan, which I hope you've downloaded from the internet. And if not, please do. And if you want to include a partner in this to sort of build your accountability or your commitment, etc., jump in and get them to download it, watch the program as well, answer the questions. Thanks, Karen. It is a good set, isn't it? Do I need to put them back up? Did everybody get them? Yeah, why the hell not? We got a few seconds. There we go. Some really interesting questions to ask of yourself to see what pops up around your own sort of levels of burnout. Am I just tired? Am I just not switching off? Have I got this FOLO thing going on? Have I incorporated some play into my life? The last 3 sessions that we've done have incorporated all the things we can do for good mental health. Have I got time in? Have I got time out? Have I got focus time? Have I got play time? Have I got exercise time, etc., etc.? We can answer all of those sorts of questions. So, bang, this is me. If anybody wants to sort of have a chat with me, this is the QR code. Please feel free to jump on. If you get onto my website, get onto my LinkedIn page, you can sort of get my newsletter, or you can ask me a question. And I'm wide open to that as well. So I hope this has been valuable, folks. And thank you for coming along today. And thank you to everybody who's watching the recording a little bit later. I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can ask some questions, particularly Karen's one, which is fabulous.